Yeah, as we get started here, first of all, we are honored that you have all joined us this evening to spend some time diving into the topic of recovering overlooked voices, women, peasants, and the Anabaptist Witness. Tonight, we have two very special guests with us that we're going to introduce. And throughout the webinar, we're going to also have some book giveaways this evening.
Speaking of books, I'd like to open our time together with a quote from Linda Huebert Hecht's epilogue in her book, which you're going to hear a lot about soon. But I think this will be a good start to our evening. What do the stories of Anabaptist women mean for us today? They speak of faith, courage, and commitment. The faith of these women carried them through imprisonment and interrogation, for some through recantation and rejoining the movement, and for some through martyrdom. The accounts of women in the Anabaptist court records of Austria illustrate that women were not just participants, but active members in the establishment of the Christian church, establishment of the Christian church in the beginning years of Anabaptism.
We are truly delighted to have two special guests joining us for this evening's conversation. Before I move into Kimberly's formal introduction, though, I wanted to share a brief personal word. Diane and I met and have gotten to know Kimberly. It's been a privilege over the past year, first through the EMU alumni tour that she and Mary Sprunger led last year. And more recently, we've worked together on the two Vienna to Venice tours that are being offered this year. Working with Kim has been a gift. She brings a remarkable depth of knowledge, but also generosity. She's been a patient teacher for both of us as we've explored these themes together and explored new areas. She brings tremendous energy and a deep passion for the stories she tells, and she has poured her heart into helping us shape meaningful new travel experiences with tour imagination. It's truly a joy to introduce her to you this evening. Now to the formal part. Kimberly D. Schmidt, PhD, is a professor emerita at Eastern Mennonite University. And Kim, I'm going to butcher this formal introduction part, but I'll try
Please.
to I'll do my best.
It's fine. Butcher
Yes.
away.
All right. An endowed scholarship in her name was recently inaugurated by EMU. This scholarship will provide funds for first generation university students to attend EMU's Washington semester, a program Kimberly directed over 20 years.
Mm.
Kimberly received her PhD in American history from Binghamton University in 1995, and her dissertation was directed by Dr. Catherine Kish Sklar.
Mhm.
Kimberly's publications include several articles that focus on various aspects of Mennonite women's history. Books include Magpie's Blanket, which was a Willa Literary Awards finalist, historical fiction category. Sorry, Kim.
That's
And
okay.
Strangers at Home, Amish and Mennonite Women in History.
Mhm.
Kimberly first met Linda Huebert Hecht, who you're going to be introduced to in a minute here, at a 1995 Mennonite Women's History Conference, The Quiet in the Land, Women of Anabaptist Traditions in Historic Perspective. The two met again at a follow-up conference later in 2017, Crossing the Line, Women of Anabaptist Traditions Encounter Borders and Boundaries, where Kimberly chaired a panel with Linda as a presenter. Kimberly is an experienced tour storyteller and guide, having led 14-week, 6-week, and 17-day Renaissance and Reformation history tours in Europe for EMU students and alumni. She is a member of the Hyattsville Mennonite Church, and she sings opera and sacred music for local churches and performance venues, and is a certified native plant advisor for the Prince George's County chapter of the Audubon Society. She currently lives in the Washington, D.C. area since 1989, and she has two grown children.
Mhm. Yeah.
Welcome, Kim.
Thank you. Thank
Our
you.
second very special guest tonight is Linda Huebert Hecht. We are so thankful that she's here. And it was kind of by chance that Richard and I met Linda in October at the Center for Transnational Mennonite Studies. We were at a conference and she did a presentation. And right after that presentation, we marched up to meet her and asked if she'd be willing to do this. And she said yes. So we're thrilled that she's here. Linda Huebert Hecht is an independent scholar whose work has deepened understanding of Anabaptist women and Canadian Mennonite history. Her research journey began at the University of Manitoba, where she received a BA. It continued with graduate work at the University of Waterloo, where she received an MA. Here she studied court records that revealed the courage and faith of early Austrian Anabaptist women, inspiring several decades of Anabaptist studies. She is co-editor with C. Arnold Snyder of Profiles of an Anabaptist Women, 16th Century Reforming Pioneers, and author of Women in Early Austrian Anabaptism, Their Days, Their Stories, both of which are widely recognized for their accessible and groundbreaking scholarship. She's also published various journal articles about Anabaptist women. In addition to her writing, Linda has made significant contributions through archival work at Conrad Grebel University and service in Ontario and Canadian Mennonite historical organizations. In 2025, she received the Mennonite Historical Society of Canada's Award of Excellence for her lasting impact in the field. So throughout this evening, we're going to be hearing from Linda and Kim, and we would love for you to be involved by just sharing a question in the chat. As they could probably speak on this topic forever, we will sometimes break in and we will answer some of your questions. We'll do some book giveaways and we'll have a really nice, really wonderful evening together. So we'll let Linda and Kim take it away.
Okay, thank you so much for that really great introduction. And
Right, thank
I
you.
also have to say that I have really enjoyed getting to know Richard and Diane. They've been wonderful to work with and to engage in this journey together to try to expand the options for Anabaptist travel, learning a little bit more about our heritage. Want to just talk to Linda a little bit about what factors led her to research Tyrolean court records. I mean, what was the instigating kind of spark that led you to do this work?
Okay, when I was ready to do a longer research essay for my master's degree, my advisor, who was Professor Walter Clausen, maybe some of you know him, he's retired now, but he was the professor at that time, and my advisor, and he said, well, you can read German, so why don't you take one of those volumes of court records and see what they say about women? And so I did. I was interested in the ones for Austria, and that territory was ruled by Ferdinand I, brother of Charles, who ruled the European Empire, Holy Roman Empire. They're called Österreichische Täuferakten, which means Austrian Anabaptist records.
Can you say few words about Greta Mensensefi and her work on these records? Just a little side note here, I gave a talk to the Vienna Community Church back in 2017. This was the most prominent English-speaking congregation in Vienna. And I asked people, how many people here have heard of Greta Mensensefi? And every single person in the audience raised their hand. And I was just blown away that so many people would have known of this woman. She was a rock star historian, if there is such a thing. And so I'd just like to, ask Linda how you encountered, if you could tell us a little bit more about Greta and her work on these records.
Right. So these records are things that male secretaries, the men were the secretaries at that time, wrote down from what the judge said about people who had been arrested, who they were with. They wanted names of people mostly, what they had been doing, whether they needed a jury, and so forth. So they're really in the moment records. They're not just somebody's ideas. And Greta Mensensefi was teaching at the University of Vienna for many years, and then she came back there for a second PhD in theology, and then she got more into Anabaptist things. And she would go into the archives and read these handwritten documents, handwritten. I can't read that stuff, but she did. And they were long, so they couldn't all be published, so she summarized them. So in the 1972 volume, we have 500 summarized court records. And she went on to do another volume of them in 1983 where she published more of the original documents because she saw how valuable they were. And she was looking for stuff on Jacob Hutter at that time. And you probably know the Hutterites, descendants, they're direct descendants of these people. And they still practice life in common today in many colonies. So I can tell you, I read her brief obituary. She got to be in her 80s. I got to know one of her co-workers. Matthias Schmelzer helped her in the second volume, getting some of these documents published. And yeah, she was definitely a very nice person. I never met her personally, but you're right. You hear lots about her. She did a lot of good work.
Yeah. Yeah. And as you started working in these records, was there anything that really surprised you or something that really stood out to you? I know that as a historian, you approach your sources and sometimes you have some preconceived notions about what you might find there. And that's one of the great things about being a historian, is just being like startled or taken aback. And do you have any like salient memories of those early days when you were first working with those records?
Well, for one thing, I found out there were so many women named, I could not get them all done at once. I did 3 years of it for my master's, and then I did the other 2 years later. And so that's what really surprised me. There were so many women, so many women. 418 was my count. And that includes women who say were arrested, but their name wasn't given. That's important too. And of these people, of these women, a high proportion were martyrs, more than that are named in the Martyr's Mirror. The Martyr's Mirror says 1/3 were women. Well, here we have about 40% of the total number. Some were leaders, some were missionaries, some were indirect participants. And the believers, the ones who were baptized, numbered 279. So I just was impressed by the number of women. I didn't expect that. I don't think my professor did either. So you can imagine what we could do if all those, there's about 30 of those volumes around that have been published now. So there's work to be done. And it's very interesting work. But you have to know German.
You have to know German, and south of the Brenner Pass in Südtirol and going into Venice, you can see how Linda's work, which was started by Greta Mensensefi, and then the baton was handed to Linda, and in some ways that baton has been handed to a young German scholar who works in Italian. Her name is Ricarda Suttner, and she's gone into the Inquisition court records, and she talks about women's appearance in the Inquisition court records in Venice. And I can just see Linda's influence all over Ricarda's work. Her book was just published this past year, Ricarda's book. And those Italian women were not named. And Ricarda refers to them as, well, they were called the sister of, the wife of. They were never named in their own right. So the fact that we have these names for these Austrian women is really wonderful. Mm-hmm. But she talks about these women as phantom witnesses because they were unnamed. But that is just really fascinating. And I think another thing that Linda's work did was so you published Profiles of Anabaptist Women in 1996. I started off as someone who was interested in social history, women's history, started my work for my PhD in 1989. And at that point, women's history was still kind of a burgeoning field. It wasn't like completely brand new, but it wasn't as well established as it is now. And the graduate programs were pretty few and far between. So this Profiles of Anabaptist Women, published in 1996, is actually a fairly early work, especially for Mennonite historiography. And what it does, I think, is really challenge what's been called normative Anabaptism, meaning the focus on Zurich and Jörg Blaurock and Felix Mons and Conrad Grebel, and not really, and then Michael Sattler comes along, right? But what Linda's book does, it focuses on the quote unquote little people, the social history, burghers, peasants, weavers, bakers,
Right.
farmers, all these like people that whose day-to-day decisions influenced the course of the Anabaptist movement and sustained the course of the Anabaptist movement. And so
Right.
as a social historian and a women's historian, I'm really grateful for her work of not just focusing on, what was going on in Switzerland, but and how were these folks related to like the Peasants' War people? I mean, that's like a whole nother topic we could get into, but
Right.
just trying to provide a little historical context here. So Linda's work really, I think, is really important because it challenges our dominant narrative of what is normative Anabaptism, and our focus. So much of the focus in this past year has been on the Zurich, people who were. It's dangerous to use that word elite right now. It's such a politically loaded word, especially in the context. I'm in the United States. I mean, it's thrown around usually, but these people, like Conrad Grebel and Felix Mons, were university educated. I mean, they came from what we would think of today as the upper classes. So we need to expand our narrative. We need to expand our focus to include these other folks as well who didn't have those kinds of opportunities. And Linda's work does a really good job of doing that. Yeah. So anything you want to add to that, Linda? Or
Yeah, I think you're right. People like Hans Hut, they started out in Vienna and then went other places. Leonard Schiemer, these were priests who were converted and preached a lot in the northern part of Tyrol. And but James Stayer, you think you know him, he's a very important historian. He has said, or it has been said, that Anabaptism could have become the main religion of Tyrol, and he agrees with that. So I think that these numbers really show that. If it hadn't been for that persecution and that they went to Moravia, that would have been the religion of Tyrol. Yeah.
Excellent. Thank you, ladies. This is my time that I get to jump in again. This last spring, Richard and I got to travel with Kim, and it was kind of treasure hunting for this tour that we were preparing, and it was wonderful. And Kim has so much knowledge, but fairly a couple of times a day, she would pull out this book of Linda's and fact check. And she had it all her sticky notes in here. She knew exactly what, she probably has it there. Yeah, there she has it. And we always thought that was so cute. So when we came home, the first thing we did is order Linda's book. And then I found out that Linda has the new book. So this is the book that we want to get into your hands. So everyone who registered for tonight, those that are watching and those that are going to watch it tomorrow because their time zone didn't allow for them to be awake at the moment, our Jazz has taken this job on to create a fun little event for us. Go ahead, Jazz.
Awesome. So, hi everyone, I'm Jazz, and it's time for our first book giveaway. So, we're going to be spinning the wheel twice each round, and we'll be giving away a total of 6 books today. So, if your name is selected, congratulations, and you've won a copy of the book. After the webinar, we'll be in touch with you via email just to confirm your mailing address and send the book over. So, let's spin the wheel for our first winner. All right, Gary, so we will reach out to you via email. So just please keep an eye out for that. And we'll be in touch. And now for our second winner. Barbara. Awesome. Congratulations. And we'll be in touch via email to get your mailing address. Thank you.
Okay, are we ready to move on? Or?
Yeah, Rich was going to just say, thanks, everyone, and we're turning it over to you. But I'll say that for him.
Oops, I missed the cue. I'm sorry.
So I'd like to move kind of more into stories about individual women now. We've kind of set a broader context for the court records and for the location. These women, most of them would be, we're going to focus mostly on Tyrol, but there may be other women as well from other parts of Europe. And Tyrol, just for people who may need a little bit more context, it's in it's Northern Tyrol is now in Western Austria, right? And Southern Tyrol is now in Italy.
Right.
You go through the Brenner Pass, which is, what is it, 4,000 miles above sea level or something at altitude. I mean, it's considered the lowest alpine pass, but it's still up there. And you after World War I, Austria lost a lot of land holdings, and they lost what's called Südtirol or Southern Tyrol. So this is in the western part of Austria. Vienna, the capital, is way to the east. So we're into the administrative center in Northern Tyrol was Innsbruck, and in Südtirol it was Brixen. So we that's kind of where we are. I wish I had a map available for you, but I didn't even think about it until right now. So just to kind of give you some context. So you're kind of going from, Austria toward Liechtenstein, toward Switzerland, on that western area of Austria. I just wanted to ask Linda, like, what women's stories, as you were doing all of this research, what were the standout women? Who were the standout women for you? Like, who were some of the women, and why did their stories touch you?
Okay. The first one I want to mention is a short story. It's a husband and wife who had both been arrested, and somebody had given them a bottle of wine. And so the two of them had their own little last communion together as they were waiting to be executed. And I thought that was very, very moving. That really moved me to tears, actually. And then we have a couple of noble women. One of them was Helena von Freiberg and Elizabeth Wolkenstein. And they both made great contributions. I should say first, I had this earlier, but didn't do it yet. The word Anabaptism had a very negative connotation in the 16th century, very negative. It was, very negative. And today that has changed because a number of Mennonite and Brethren churches have their roots in Anabaptism. So that's the difference. That's one thing that's quite different. Anyway, coming back to Helena here. She lived in a castle called Munichau, and I think that's been on your tour. Mm-hmm. That's where she was born and grew up. She married a man of equal status, and his name was, what was his name? We'll come to it later.
Glig?
Pardon me?
That Bavarian noble, Glig, Gilg.
It was a little bit different. Started with O. I'll come to it. Onofrius.
Okay.
Onofrius.
Oh, yeah. Glig was her father.
Yeah, right.
Okay.
Her official title was Baroness Helena Freifrau von Freiberg. They had four sons. Two of them died. won in the French wars, and their eldest one was so influential in Bavaria. He was working in the government. He almost managed to bring the Reformation to Bavaria, but in the end, it didn't work. So when the nest was empty, when the four boys were grown up and gone, Helena also inherited her castle again from her stepmother. So by March 1528, she was living there, and it was recorded in the government records that she had become an Anabaptist, she and her whole household. That's all her maids and herdsmen, etc. So she was a resistor, though. It took them 2 years. It took them 2 years, the government, to get enough evidence against her. You had to really be sure of yourself if you were dealing with upper class people. And so after 2 years, they've had enough evidence, but she said, no, I am not going to recant. That's not what I'm going to do. And they wanted her to recant in the church so that as many people as possible would be influenced. Well, she refused to do that. And so finally they said, okay, we'll at least get her to recant. And she did it in front of a government official. Then she left for Augsburg and never came back to Munich. She wrote a confession later, which is unique because it's one of the very few pieces of handwriting from an Anabaptist woman. And she confessed a sin that she had committed. And I think my interpretation was that that was because she had recanted. She was sorry about it later. Okay. There was one way to get out of this situation if you had been arrested and were supposed to be condemned, and that was to recant. And this meant you had to deny your faith publicly in front of the whole church. You had to walk into the church behind a priest dressed in a white robe, kneel in the front of the church for the whole service, and then you could finally say you could come back to the church, and you had to do that on several Sundays. That was one way of recanting. And then they would often, the majority of them would go back to their group of Anabaptists, and that congregation did not hold it against them that they had recanted, not at all. And however, if there was arrest of a recanted person who recanted a second time, that was not easy. There was no mercy from the government then. So that was the difference. Let's see now here. We have also financial information about some of these Anabaptist families. Now, for Helena, that castle was eventually sold. The sons eventually sold it for 7,500 gulden, which was quite an amount. When the government started collecting their possessions and selling them and taking the money, we have a number of interesting inventories. They might even have given the number of frying pans they had. It was quite detailed. And so a number of families went through that and had various amounts of money that they had to give to the government. Okay, going back a little bit to January 1527, the very beginning, there was a literate woman, the wife of Matthias Messerschmidt, who owned a store, and she could read and write. She read scripture and pamphlet literature at meetings in their home, and the people wanted to write a letter of protest against the priests and the local church. So they decided they wanted a letter to put on the church door, and she was the one who wrote that up for them. So this small church there in Clausen could still be viewed, probably. Another a very important person in 1528 records was an Anabaptist artist, the first and only that I know of, Anabaptist artist named Bartlomew. He was the son of the famous South German sculptor Till Riemenschneider. In Germany, that name is known and everybody knows who he is. So this was his son, and he became an Anabaptist. He lived in Bozen with his family. His wife, Katharina, his mother-in-law, Margaret, and their maid were all reported to be Anabaptists. Well, the maid said, no, I have nothing to do with that. Anyways, Dill's painting of 1533 was called The Crucifixion, and it includes actually a small self-portrait of him in a velvet hat. Today, that portrait is in a castle museum in Sigmaringen, Germany. I don't know if that's on your list, but that's really worth seeing. He was also a gifted ceramic artist, and that's where I found out who he was. I saw one of the stoves in a museum in Italy. I'm going to find out the name of that town. It was not as far as Trent, but it was a big town, and this was a big castle, and there was this beautiful ceramic blue and white stove that he had created. So he was quite an artist. Later, his mother-in-law rejoined the movement, and after being arrested the second time, she became a martyr. But Dill kind of managed to avoid it, and his wife too. Then there was a man named Peter Egger. He was a baker, an Anabaptist leader. And when he went on preaching tours, he took his sister along, Anna, and another man. And they went out giving information about Anabaptism. His wife, Christina's punishment was exile, but because they had so many children, she was allowed to return home on the condition that she recant. And then that brings up another story about bread. You'll find this one quite interesting. In Styria, a bordering area of Tyrol, the women were preaching and doing radical things. In July 1528, Caspar Mahler's wife was spreading a new interpretation of communion. She said in her statement to the authorities, she was amazed, quote, that people take the sacrament and that they think God would have allowed himself to be baked in an oven, end quote. She was basically saying the bread in communion could impossibly be Christ's actual body. That was their interpretation. They called it the Lord's Supper, not communion, and the Anabaptists saw it as a time of remembering Christ's death and bringing salvation. Then the punishment meted out was sometimes according to the crime. Ursula of Essen was to receive corporal punishment. So she endured a public flogging in the town pillory of Kurtach. I was mentioning that town to you, Kimberly. Mm-hmm. And because she refused to name fellow prisoners. In 1529, the Anabaptist movement peaked there, and there was much more use of torture, even for women. Sometimes just the threat of torture made people give a confession. So that increased. Then in the town of Rattenberg, I think you will go by that one. You probably know that one. Yeah. It's east of Innsbruck, and it was where the Anabaptists departed, gone on a boat to go to Moravia to escape. So the persecution reached a climax in Rattenberg in May 23, 1529, when an unprecedented number of Anabaptists were executed in the castle above the town, 10 women and 7 men. And the town council minutes read, quote, without a doubt, in the history of Rattenberg, there have never been executions of so many persons at once, end quote.
I should say that was Pilgrim Marpeck's birthplace, and there's a plaque on a actually it's kind of on the main walking area.
Okay. Yeah.
Went to Rottenborg, and it's just kind of it's actually fairly prominent because he was also, in addition, like we know him as an Anabaptist, but they remember him as a brilliant civil engineer. So
right. He worked in the mines there.
He was commemorated there. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Yes, that's good to know. Yeah. Nice that you've seen that. Mm-hmm. So in total, 77 women in Tyrol became martyrs, 40%. I think I mentioned that earlier. And this was a higher number than in the Martyr's Mirror, which has traditionally been the only source we had about women. Then there's a family, Paul and Agnes Frauenholz. Their story is interesting because their inventory shows they had 8 cows. So they were wealthy, according to that. More than sheep. Each was worth 3 gulden, the calves were worth 1 gulden, whereas the sheep altogether were only worth 3 gulden. So since they owned 6 cows, they were better off. In some inventories, even the number of frying pans hanging in the kitchen was noted. And in the case of Agnes here, her dowry was included in the inventory. It was worth 24 gulden, which was quite a sum. And the total value of their possessions was 177, which isn't that great. They had 4 children that had to be supported from that money because the parents fled. You were going to say something?
In general, you found that these Anabaptist households, yes, there were a number of like peasants, but there were also a number of people who were of the burgher class or the rising merchant class. And some of these inventories, they were actually, some of them were quite wealthy, maybe not on the same level as the nobility. And then Ferdinand I, when he, this was a way for him to make a lot of money, actually, to
Right.
persecute or prosecute Anabaptists and then take all of their holdings and their land and their inventory
That's right. At one point, somebody complained and said, this has to stop. This is getting too much. We have more than we need to fight the Turks.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. That's interesting to bring in the Turks as well, because yes, they were trying to pad their war chests and were able to do that off of these Anabaptist inventories. Yeah.
Right. Okay, now there's one example of an Agnes, also that was a popular name. She was one of 2 maids working in the home of an Anabaptist family called Hans and Anna Gasser. She was in jail with 2 young herdsmen who worked for the neighboring Anabaptist family. So these 3 young people were interrogated with and without the use of torture and should have been condemned to death. But the jury said, no, they are too young to be tried in a criminal court. Because of their youth, their lack of understanding, and this is an argument often used for women, the simple-mindedness of the young woman, they were spared death. However, they were to be punished as an example and to prevent other young people from joining Anabaptism.
Yeah.
I'll stop there.
Well, I saw that Shirley Showalter is on this on our webinar, and she was on our tour, and she made a comment about how surprised she was that there was so much recantation going on, and that you made this remark about how people would recant fairly regularly, right? They would recant, and then they would go back after some time back to their Anabaptist ways. And then if they were caught again, they were considered relapsees. And at that point, execution was like a foregone conclusion.
Right.
But this whole notion of our heritage being a martyr heritage, when actually we need to balance that out with getting out of there, leaving, recanting, going to Moravia,
Right.
trying to survive, not just gladly singing, on our way to being, on the way to being, burned at the stake or whatever, but that people
Right.
were, which is how I learned about my heritage when I was young, was that, you suffer and you are, and you accept, whatever the authorities, I was taught that martyr heritage, that martyr story. It was very important. Those were very important stories when I was growing up. And so this is one thing that has surprised us about these records, these court records, is how often these women, and not just the women, but how often the Anabaptists recanted and then
Right.
caught
That's
again.
right.
Yeah.
Here's a story of a woman named Anna Welzenberger. She was pregnant at the time of her arrest. Now, if you were pregnant, you could wait until your child was born and then come back to be tried. And he didn't always, quote, get back. Anyways, this woman said, no, I am not going to recant. Her husband, her father, and the judge, 3 of them, tried to persuade her to recant, and she would not do it. So she spent her pregnancy in jail, and then was executed later.
Yeah.
Quite something, that story.
Yeah. These women, it reminds me of an experience I had at Eastern Mennonite University for the 2017 conference, Crossing the Line, Anabaptist Women of Anabaptist Traditions Encounter Borders and Boundaries. And I stayed in the dorms. We got money for women to come from, Africa and Central America and also India. And so I was in the dorms with all these international women, and we'd get together and we'd talk about what was going on with women's leadership in these countries. And often these women who were leaders in their own right, once they got married, they became wives of, and they were expected to model Anabaptist womanhood. And Anabaptist womanhood in these countries did not mean, this explosive, confrontational examples that you're putting before us today, where women would take the stand in the courtrooms and they would quote Bible verses back to the magistrates, and the magistrates would get so frustrated with them that they would call them evil women or note them for their böse Sprache, their evil language, and sometimes, especially further north, they'd start putting tongue screws in women to keep them from testifying. I call these women testifiant. They would testify in a kind of a defiant way. And why have we, this is a rhetorical question, but why have we come to ascribe being silenced as part of our Anabaptist womanhood heritage when you look at this early period that's represented in these court records? Women were vocal and active, and they would get caught and they'd take a stand and they testify, and then they were let go, and then they'd recant, and then they'd get caught again. So there was a lot of churn going on, and many of them disappear from the historical record, which is a good thing, right? Which means that they weren't caught, that they made it to Moravia, or they made it to some place of safety.
That's right.
Or maybe the recantation stuck. But I have to really think a lot about why have we still today, in today's contexts, cite Anabaptist womanhood as a quiet in the land, when we really need to recover these more I feel like we really need to recover these more activist voices. But
the thing is, you're talking about African women. That's interesting. There are more Mennonite brethren in Africa than in Canada, aren't there? And in these countries in Africa, I think there's still persecution going on.
Right.
How about the people that live in Abu Dhabi or some of those countries? There's still persecution of. Some of them have to be very quiet and silent so they don't get caught.
Right.
So we are extremely fortunate here that we don't have that.
Yeah.
But it's in our heritage, and we have no idea what's ahead of us. We should be prepared, because we don't know.
For sure.
I'm
Thank you
just saying
so
that.
much, ladies. These two could clearly go on with these stories forever. I just know it. So I'm going to jump in because it's time for Jazz to come jump on with us.
Yep, I am here. And let's get our second round of giveaways going. All right. So our third book giveaway goes to Irene Platt. Congratulations. All right. And now let's get our fourth book giveaway. Goes to Barry. Congratulations. And now we have just one more round of giveaways left for the evening, so stay on here.
So we said we were going to take your questions, which we will, but Kim is so efficient that she's chatting with Linda and answering your questions at the same time. So that's why we haven't had to stop.
Yeah.
So we're going to go for one more little section with Kim and Linda. before we wind up, and we will try to wind up by 8 o'clock. We'll do our best. Go ahead, Kim and Linda.
Oh, okay. Kim, can I just add one thing about why there were so many women? Somebody has hypothesized about this. Max Weber, the famous sociologist, said that in the beginning of any movement, even like, say, the French Revolution, but especially religious movements, there are always more women in the beginning because everybody is needed. And then as it progresses later on, there won't be many women and there won't be all the men either. So that's one theory. But for the Anabaptists, there are two other things that are important. And that is when a person became a Christian and chose to be Anabaptist, the Holy Spirit entered their hearts. And so the Holy Spirit was God talking to them, and that could be for women as well as men. So the Holy Spirit was an important factor in encouraging women to participate in this movement. Secondly, the focus on the Bible. That was a new thing. The Bible was no longer a book that was laying on the pulpit in the church and read only by the priest. That period was gone because through the printing press, they could make parts of the Bible available, and they could be used for readings in the home. And the Bible was a very important part of the Anabaptist faith. So those were two additional reasons why you had a lot of Anabaptists.
Yeah,
Okay.
well, I mean, you bring up a couple points here. This notion of reading the Bible in the home and during work days, like some of the records reveal how even peasant women, which I would have thought were not as literate, but you have people like Agnes Link and Margaret Hottinger who were literate peasant. They were of the peasant class. These were both Swiss women, not Tyrolean women, but were known for reading at these spinning and weaving work days, and could read out loud and also take positions of authority in terms of interpreting the scriptures as they went. Both Agnes Link and Margaret Hottinger were caught, were imprisoned. Both were let go after some time. Margaret ended up being apprehended with her father when they were on their way trying to escape from Switzerland to Moravia, and they were apprehended near not Rattenberg, but Rottenburg, I think, if memory serves. And then Agnes Link is a very interesting character because she is one of these women who would take the stand. She was kind of sharp and decisive and didn't hold back. You know, like even her testimonies were very pointed, and she would challenge the magistrates. And she was let go actually a second time. The first time, you know, she was let go. She recanted and she was let go. But then the second time, she was caught in a bookstore in Basel, and she was buying a Bible of all things. And she was very determined to buy a Bible that didn't have any commentaries. She didn't want Erasmus's Bible. She didn't want Luther's Bible. She wanted just the Word of God, no commentaries. And she said some disparaging things about people who write commentaries, you know, and this got her into trouble. And then what got her out the second time was that the bookseller testified on her behalf. And so she was let go. And we don't hear from her again. But she's an interesting gal because she was one of these testifiant women, and she didn't even have to pay her court costs or her jail costs. They just said, okay, here's the door, out you go. So somebody was kind of, I don't know, looking after her, or maybe it was the testimony of that bookseller. But just fascinating to read about these peasant women and how they were literate and determined and brave and
right.
courageous, so courageous to take on
Mhm.
the magistrates of the day. And yeah, I found her pretty interesting. Another thing, yeah.
Oh, sorry, I was just going to interject. You can finish your thoughts. Sorry, we have some questions from the audience we
Oh,
want to get to yet.
let's get to the questions
Are
because
you
we're almost
sure?
out of time here. Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah.
Sorry, ladies, to interrupt.
Oh,
We were sent some questions in advance. Those that weren't able to join did send some questions in, and some of the questions, and we won't get through them all, but there was a question that was sent to us. Are you still, and this could be directed either to you, Linda, or Kimberly, are you still uncovering Anabaptist stories that have not been told? So we're hearing some of these that you're uncovering and sharing, but are you still uncovering new ones that haven't been told? Can you comment on that?
Oh, there's lots that haven't been told. There's 30 volumes of court records. I went through one. People sometimes
So,
go into various ones and pick out a few examples. But if you go through page by page, it's fascinating what you discover. Sometimes the women become the Anabaptist and the rest of the family doesn't. Sometimes the husband becomes an Anabaptist and the rest of the family doesn't. It's really, really a challenging thing
interesting.
for that
Wow.
time.
It's like forensics you were going through, forensic studying on court records.
on our
Incredible.
tour last year, I saw Wendy Funk Schrag is on this webinar. We met a preacher by the name of Peter Brandis in Salzburg. And we started talking with him, and he had just put up this really fascinating exhibit on 500 years of Anabaptism in Salzburg, which was very Roman. It was called the Rome of the North. I was so surprised to see that there. And he talks about how in Salzburg, in the city archives, are records and records and records of Anabaptists and what they were doing 500 years ago. And that is, those records are untapped. Like, I don't know anybody who's working with those records. I haven't heard of anything.
Wow.
And then you've got Martin Rothkegel, who's a German historian who has compiled thousands of pages of records that he keeps on threatening to publish.
Yeah.
So he's got to
Wow.
do that. And then the other person that I am aware of right now who's doing a lot of like recent uncovering of stories is Ricarda Suitner. She's German, she's in Munich, but she works in Italian sources. So the whole Italian, I think we're just on the verge of getting, if we get enough younger scholars in there who've got a lot of time and can read German and can maybe also work in Italian, I think that there are going to be some really interesting, stories that start to surface.
A
There was
follow-up.
just
I
Oh,
was just going
sorry.
to say, we have a follow-up question to that
Question. Yeah.
from Sue. Are
there's
those
a
records mostly from the 1520s and 30s or
that
later
was a
than
good
that?
question. Yeah, no,
Mhm.
it goes on into
Yeah.
the 60s.
Yeah.
I Yeah, late 60s and are is maybe one of the last persecutions. It goes on for a long time. It isn't always as intense. And you've got other areas. You've got a very intense area in the Netherlands and Switzerland. Yeah, they were just all over.
One of our audience sent us an earlier question as well. Do you have a sense for how supportive the families were of the women, or how supportive the families of these women were in the records that you were looking at?
Sometimes they were very supportive, sometimes they were not. There's a lot of cases where a whole family would be Anabaptist, the brothers, the sisters, the parents. There's a number of cases like that. But then there
They
the
would
odd
also,
one where you get only the women's name.
or they would also baptize all the maids as well. Like it was the family, but
Yeah,
then all the household staff was also baptized. So the entire household would have
right.
that status. Yeah.
Yeah, yeah. Like I talked about Agatha with the herdsmen,
Yeah.
young
Mhm.
people, all ages. And
Mhm.
one family, Nickingers, I think they were. When they went off to Moravia, there was a young couple in the family. That's the case where most of them were Anabaptists. They had a little baby
Mm.
that they had to leave behind. And guess
Mhm.
who they gave it to? Their 100-year-old mother. She got to keep the child.
Goodness.
That one was really interesting. Hmm.
Um, um, To both of you, thank you very much. As we come to close this evening, folks, you can still put your questions in. We have a few minutes left as we're going to start wrapping up. If you have the audience any questions, please post them in the chat, and we'll try to get to those as well. But I just wanted to take a moment to just briefly highlight our Vienna to Venice journeys that are coming up here. We have two departures this year on the tour that Kim was referring to for this year, one in May and one in September. The May tour is confirmed, and we're going ahead with it. And we still have a few remaining spots if anyone is feeling inspired to join us this spring. But I also especially want to mention our September departure that's coming up. For those who may prefer early fall travel, slightly smaller crowds, beautiful light in the mountains, and a different seasonal feel, September is a wonderful time to experience this journey that we've heard pieces of tonight. We would truly love to see this group come together in September. We've extended our early bird savings for both departures through to March 16th, so there's still an opportunity to take advantage of those preferred rates. This, if I will just take a second, this will be a little salesy, but this tour is designed to bring the people and places you've heard about tonight to life. It's one thing to learn about these stories. It's another thing to stand in the places and spaces where faith and culture intertwined here. From Vienna's imperial legacy and Reformation legacy through the valleys of Südtirol that we'll travel through and into the beauty of Venice. We trace both the Anabaptist story here and that we've talked about tonight and the broader cultural and artistic world that shaped it. Along the way, we'll experience music, rich local traditions, and the breathtaking Dolomite Mountains, while staying in distinctive and carefully chosen accommodations that will deepen our experience along the way here. I'm personally looking forward to returning to Südtirol and the beauty of the Puster Valley this coming way when I join Kimberly on this tour. Kim, what about you? What are a few of the places you're especially looking forward to revisiting in this journey this spring or this year?
Well, we have a lot of local guides who are, I guess one way of putting it is kind of quirky. They are committed to Anabaptism. These are people who are Austrian and in the Czech Republic. And I always really love just kind of reconnecting with them. And when I say quirky, I mean, they are still in that free church tradition and have to kind of go against, I mean, there's still a really pro-Catholic stance in Austria. It's one of the most conservative Catholic countries in Europe. And I have run into some anti-Anabaptism sentiment there. So some of our Austrian friends have to kind of, be able to take it on the chin from time to time when people find out that they're part of the free church tradition there. So I'm really looking forward to just getting together with those folks again. But then I feel like in general, what I always tend to revel in is how Anabaptist history, like where these sites are, where this history took place, is so centrally located. It's not on the fringes of the cities or right in the middle of Salzburg, right in the middle of Vienna, right in the middle of Venice. All of this history was taking place. So we're going on these tours and we're learning so much about Anabaptist history, but we're right there, on Kartnerstrasse, which is the main pedestrian zone through Venice, which is where the Crusades marched, through in the 11th and 12th centuries. So, I mean, there's so much. Salzburg is the same, all these places. So we're very centrally located. And, another example of that would be the Golden Stachel, which is the main tourist attraction in Innsbruck. And right there is a little sign that says this is where Jakob Hutter was persecuted and burned, right there in that central square. So this Anabaptist history is not fringe history. It is central at that, in that time period. And I've always been, when I've developed these walking tours, I'm like, here I am in the middle of this beautiful, beautiful location. And you have to use a little historical imagination to take you back to, what it was like in the 16th century. But
can I just add something about Jakob Hutter?
Mm-hmm.
He was married, and his wife was executed a few years after him, but she outlived him a bit. He also had a sister. We saw their house. There's a house in Moose that's up in the St. Lorenzen area. That's where he grew up. And with, I don't know, 10 or so brothers and sisters. And the sister worked a little bit further up the mountain, but she was an Anabaptist too. And in the end gave her life too.
Wow.
And Katerina was one who was recanted, let go, caught, recanted, let go, and then finally, it was like several times before she.
Okay. Yeah, that's right.
Excellent. Thank you, Linda and Kim. I'm going to call Jazz back in one more time. She's going to pull out her little spinning wheel before we close tonight.
Yes. So now for the final round of our last 2 book giveaways. Let's spin.
What happens if Linda's name is called?
There's some
Then she
great
gets to give
pictures
a
in the
book
book
away.
too.
All right, Jill. So we'll be in touch with you to get the book to your house. All right. And now for our final and lucky last winner. We've got Ernest. Ernest?
Oh,
awesome.
Thanks, Jazz.
Thank you.
To respect all of your time, we want to end on time, but I do know that we could also keep going for a long time. So I just want to say a huge thank you, Kim, for your time, your work with True Imagination, your friendship, your leadership, everything. It's been a joy to get to know you. We look forward to many more years of tours and many more gelato dates in Italy. Linda.
I'll be there.
So will we. Linda, thank you so much. Spending your evening with us, all your preparation, all of your work. It is
Thank
just
you.
amazing for the research that you've done in this space. It gives a voice to these Anabaptist women. Their legacy will continue. And yeah, I know the 6 people who won your book will love it. And we've already had a few people jump on and say that they've already purchased it. So
right. I hope you have a wonderful trip. Great times to go in May and September. Super.
Thank you.
All the best to you.
Wonderful.
Thank you, everyone.
I just want to add my thanks to Linda as well. Without her work, I couldn't do these tours. They are the groundwork for these tours. So very, very happy.
You're welcome. I'm glad you enjoyed that.
Wonderful. Have a good evening, everyone.
Thank you.